At exactly 6:14 in the morning, the heavy oak front door of my ancestral home began to shake violently. It wasn't a simple knock, nor was it the frantic pounding of someone desperate. No, this was the thunderous boom of a sledgehammer slamming into wood that had stood for over a century. My heart jumped into my throat as I heard my daughter-in-law, Jessica, screaming my name from the porch. Her voice, once sweet and full of charm, had now morphed into a shrill, hysterical cry that cut through the fog of Savannah's morning like a blade. "Eleanor, open this door right now. I know you changed the locks. This is illegal. You can't do this to us." I stood frozen in the foyer, my bare feet pressed against the cold marble tiles. I could feel the vibrations of each strike travel through the floorboards and deep into my bones. My heart pounded fiercely against my chest, each beat a frantic bird trapped in a cage. But oddly enough, my hands were steady. I looked down at them. They were the hands of a 72-year-old woman, wrinkled and spotted with the marks of time. Yet they didn't tremble. Not anymore. The fear that had held me captive for months, weeks, years even had dissipated, replaced by something far more powerful: rage. It was cold and sharp, like ice forming over a raging river. It felt almost medicinal, like a cure for the years of neglect, the years of being invisible in my own home. "Lucas," my son shouted now. "I'm going to break this door down, Mom. I swear. I'll take this whole thing off its hinges if you don't open up." I glanced at the grandfather clock in the hallway, the one Arthur had restored with his own hands 40 years ago. It was 6:16. Mr. Sterling, my attorney, was due to arrive at 6:30 through the garden entrance. Just hold on, I thought. Just 14 more minutes. I could feel the weight of the situation bearing down on me, but I had no intention of backing down. Another deafening crack echoed through the foyer, and I saw a spiderweb fracture appear on the side panel of the door. Lucas was serious. He was really doing it. My son, the boy I had nursed through scarlet fever, the young man whose college tuition I had paid by selling my own jewelry, was now using a sledgehammer against the sanctuary I had spent a lifetime building. "Hold on, I'll take care of it," a voice spoke from behind me. I turned slowly, not startled. Harrison Sterling, my attorney, stood in the shadows of the hallway, impeccable in a charcoal three-piece suit. He looked every bit the Southern legal shark he was known to be. His presence was commanding, yet there was a calm in him that only made the situation feel more dire for the others. "Open it, Eleanor. Let them see what they've done," he said, his voice steady as always. I reached for the deadbolt, my fingers brushing the cold brass. I had installed these heavy-duty locks only 6 hours ago, paying a locksmith triple his usual rate for a midnight emergency call. With a sharp click, I disengaged the bolt, and the door swung inward. There on my porch stood Lucas, his chest heaving, a heavy sledgehammer raised mid-swing. Sweat was beading on his forehead, even in the morning chill. Jessica stood beside him, her face twisted in fury, mascara running down her cheeks like dark rivers of betrayal. But when the door opened, and they saw not just a frail old woman but the imposing figure of Harrison Sterling standing beside me like a sentinel, everything changed. The sledgehammer slipped from Lucas's grip, hitting the floor with a dull thud. Their faces drained of color so quickly they looked like ghosts. They knew who Harrison was. Everyone with assets in Georgia knew him. And in that silence, broken only by the chirping of crickets and Lucas's ragged breathing, they realized the game was over. But before I tell you how a mother finds the strength to lock her own child out of her home, how I watched their entitlement crumble, you need to understand who I was before that moment. You need to understand the woman who opened that door with eyes of steel. 6 months ago, I was a different person entirely. Back then I was a widow drowning in the silence of a house that felt too big, too empty. I was a mother desperate for connection, a fool who believed that unconditional love was a currency that could never be devalued. If you want to understand how I went from being the perfect victim to the architect of my own liberation, you have to listen closely. Because the road to hell is not just paved with good intentions. It's paved with the silent concessions a mother makes until there's nothing left of her to give. It all began on a rainy Tuesday in November, when Georgia's winter had arrived early, bringing with it a damp chill that settled deep into the old Victorian walls of my home. I was in the kitchen brewing a pot of Earl Grey tea, the steam rising into the air as the rain tapped lightly against the windowpane. I felt the familiar pang of loneliness, The kind that had been my constant companion since Arthur passed away 5 years prior. Then the phone rang, shattering the quiet. It was Lucas. His voice sounded strained, tight. "Mom, can we come over? We need to talk. It's urgent." My stomach dropped. A mother's intuition, you know? It's a curse that never expires. I told him to come immediately. An hour later they were here. Lucas, Jessica, and my 2 grandchildren, Leo 14 and Mia 10, arrived, trailing behind them with backpacks that looked suspiciously full. They sat in my living room, the one Arthur and I had decorated with so much care, surrounded by oil paintings and antique furniture that told the story of our life together. Lucas couldn't look me in the eye. He sat with his head in his hands, his leg bouncing nervously. Jessica, though, looked straight at me, her eyes welling with tears. Tears that I would later learn she could summon on command. "We lost the house, Eleanor," she whispered, her voice trembling. "The bank foreclosed. We have to be out by Friday." The air left the room. My son homeless. I looked at Leo and Mia, huddled together on the love seat, their faces pale and frightened. My heart shattered for them. I didn't ask how it happened. I didn't ask about the failed business ventures Lucas had vaguely mentioned, or the lavish vacations Jessica posted about on social media. I didn't ask about the new cars they drove to Thanksgiving dinner in. In that moment, logic was suspended, overtaken by maternal instinct. "You will stay here," I said, reaching out to touch Lucas's knee. "This is your home. It always has been. We have 5 bedrooms. There's plenty of space." Jessica let out a sob of relief and threw her arms around me. "Oh, thank you, Eleanor. Thank you. You saved us. We won't be a burden. Promise. It'll just be for a few months, until Lucas gets his feet back on the ground." And for a while everything felt calm. Too calm. Almost like a honeymoon period. I cooked elaborate dinners, meals Lucas had always loved as a child. Roast chicken with rosemary beef bourguignon. I heard the sound of the children laughing in the hallways, and for the first time in a long time, the ghost of my loneliness began to fade. But predators are patient. They don't strike when they first arrive. No, they wait until you've lowered your defenses, until you've welcomed them into your sanctuary. Then, when you least expect it, they begin to consume you from the inside out. It started slowly. The changes were subtle at first, disguised as acts of care. It was the 3rd week when I came home from my book club to find the living room rearranged. My favorite reading chair, the velvet wingback that Arthur had bought me on our 30th anniversary, was gone. In its place was a sleek, modern beige armchair that looked like it belonged in a dentist's waiting room. Jessica walked in, smiling brightly. "Oh, you're home. Do you like it? We moved that old dusty chair to the garage," she said, her voice chipper. "It was terrible for your back, Eleanor. This one's ergonomic, much better for your posture." I stood there blinking, a strange tightness in my chest. "I like that chair," I said softly. "Arthur gave it to me." Jessica's smile didn't waver, but her eyes hardened slightly. "Eleanor, you have to stop clinging to the past. It's unhealthy. Dust and old fabric trigger allergies. We're just thinking of your health." I let it go. I told myself she meant well. She was young. She didn't understand the sentimental value of things. But each small change, each decision made for me without asking me, broke me down. Tell me in the comments. And if you've dealt with something similar, share your story. You're not alone. Subscribe for more stories about standing your ground and reclaiming your life. What will happen next to Eleanor as she battles the growing control over her life? Stay tuned for the next part of her emotional journey. By December, the invasion had escalated from rearranging furniture to controlling my lifestyle. Jessica had taken over the kitchen, declaring that my cooking was too heavy, too full of fats and sodium. She threw away my butter, my heavy cream, my spices, and replaced them with kale, quinoa, and almond milk. When I tried to make Christmas cookies with Mia one afternoon, Jessica swooped in and took the mixing bowl out of my hands. "Too much sugar," she chided, dumping the batter straight into the trash while Mia looked on, her eyes full of confusion and sadness. "We don't want Grandma to get diabetes, do we, Mia?" I stood there, the words stinging, though I tried to keep my composure. "Eleanor, you really need to watch your diet at your age. We're doing this because we love you. We want you to be around for a long time." That phrase became their mantra. repeated over and over again like a drumbeat that slowly chipped away at my dignity. At your age. They spoke to me slowly, loudly, as though my hearing had failed. Even though I had perfect hearing, they made decisions for me without consulting me, and as each day passed, I felt myself becoming smaller, more invisible in the very house I had built with love and care. But the worst was yet to come. I came back from a weekend visit to my sister in Charleston to find the hallway bare. Arthur's collection of landscape paintings, his pride and joy, was gone. The walls, once adorned with the works of art that told the story of our life together, were now painted a cold, sterile gray. Where are the paintings? I asked, my voice trembling with rising panic. Lucas looked up from his phone casually, chewing on an apple as though this was just another ordinary day. Oh hey Mom. We put them in storage. The frames were rotting and honestly they were kind of depressing. Jessica thought the gray made the hallway look bigger. Modern storage, just a unit downtown. Don't worry, they're safe. We're just updating the vibe, Mom. You don't want to live in a museum, do you? I stood there, stunned, my heart sinking. I went to my room and cried. I had never felt so unseen, so erased. My home, the physical manifestation of my life, my memories, was being stripped away, layer by layer, repainted in the colors of strangers. But the emotional abuse, the slow suffocation of my spirit, was just the beginning. In January, the narrative shifted. Jessica began complaining of headaches, and she would spend days in bed with the curtains drawn, moaning softly whenever I walked past her door. Lucas, too, walked around with the weight of the world on his shoulders, constantly looking tired and stressed. Finally, over a dinner of flavorless steamed vegetables, Lucas dropped the bombshell. It's Jessica, he said, his voice cracking. She saw a specialist. It's a rare neurological condition. The doctors here, they can't do anything. But there's a clinic in Switzerland and experimental treatment. It has a 90% success rate. My heart stopped. Despite everything, despite the gray walls, the missing furniture, there was one thing I could never deny. She was the mother of my grandchildren. Is she going to be okay if she gets the treatment? I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Yes, Lucas said. But it's not covered by insurance. It's expensive, Mom. We don't have the credit. How much? I asked, my voice a little shakier than I would have liked. $150,000. The silence in the room was suffocating. $150,000. It was a significant portion of my savings, money I had set aside for emergencies, for the upkeep of this house, for the grandchildren's college funds. I didn't hesitate. I have the money, I said quietly. Lucas looked up at me, his eyes wide with feigned shock. Mom, we couldn't ask you to do that. That's your retirement. A life is worth more than money, Lucas, I said, my voice firm. I'll go to the bank tomorrow. The next day I transferred the funds. Jessica wept in my arms, promising me she would never forget this sacrifice, that I had saved her life. 2 weeks later, she flew out, supposedly to Zurich for her life-saving treatment. Lucas stayed behind with the children. The house was quieter, but something was off. There was an odd atmosphere, a strange tension that hung in the air. Lucas was constantly on the phone, whispering, always in hushed tones. I didn't trust it. It was purely by chance that the lie unraveled. 3 weeks after Jessica had left for her treatment, I ran into Mrs. Gable at the grocery store. Mrs. Gable was the town gossip, a woman who knew everything about everyone in Savannah. Eleanor, so good to see you, she chirped, her voice full of that unmistakable excitement. I saw Jessica yesterday. She looks fantastic. I froze. Jessica? But she's in Switzerland, I said, my voice trembling. Mrs. Gable frowned. Switzerland, honey? I saw her coming out of the Azure Spa and Recovery Center in Atlanta. My niece works there. She said Jessica had the full mommy makeover. Tummy tuck, nose job. Said she was recovering beautifully. The world tilted on its axis. My hands went cold. A mommy makeover? A plastic surgery spree? That's what my $150,000 had gone to. Vanity? Deceit? I drove home in a daze, my hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles turned white. When I arrived back at the house, I didn't confront Lucas immediately. No, I wasn't going to be hasty. But a cold knot of suspicion had formed in my stomach. If they could lie about this, they could lie about anything. That night, I did something I never thought I would do. I remembered a baby monitor system that had been stashed away in the attic, one I hadn't used since Leo was an infant. It was old, but it still worked. I set up the receiver in my bedroom and hid the transmitter behind a stack of books in the living room, where Lucas and Jessica were sitting. I wanted proof. I needed to know the extent of the rot that had taken root in my family. I sat in the dark of my bedroom, the speaker pressed to my ear. Their voices came through, tinny but clear. She suspects nothing. Jessica's voice came through, sounding different, nasally, likely from the swelling of her recent surgery. She bought the whole sick act, hook, line, and sinker. "We have to move fast though," Lucas replied, his voice calm, terrifyingly pragmatic. "The money for the surgery is gone. We need the big payout. The real estate market is peaking. This house is worth $5 million, easy with the historical designation. But she won't sell." Jessica snapped. "You know how obsessed she is with this place. That's why we stick to the plan. We keep breaking her down," Lucas said. "We convince her she's losing her mind. Small things. Hiding her keys, leaving the stove on, moving things and denying it. We build a case for dementia. By summer we'll have power of attorney. We put her in that facility, Shady Pines. It's cheap." "Shady Pines." Jessica laughed, her voice cruel. "That place is a dump. Smells like urine and cabbage. Who cares? It's free. That leaves us the entire equity of the house," Lucas continued, his voice ice cold. $5 million, Jess. We can buy that penthouse in Miami. We can finally live the life we deserve." I felt my stomach turn. My son, my own flesh and blood, was planning to lock me away in a state-run facility, strip me of my home, and sell my legacy to buy a penthouse in Miami. That night, as the voices from the baby monitor echoed in my ears, something inside me snapped. The woman who had been a mother, a caretaker, the one who had swallowed her pain and sacrificed everything for her family, was gone. She had died, in a way, in the quiet darkness of my bedroom, replaced by someone stronger. Someone who would not tolerate being made a fool of any longer. I sat there, my heart racing with a cocktail of anger, sorrow, and the cold realization of betrayal. Lucas, my only son, was plotting to rob me of everything I had worked for, to strip away my dignity and sell my memories for a life of luxury. Jessica, who had promised to care for me, had turned into a master manipulator, lying, scheming, all for vanity and greed. But I wasn't the frail woman they thought I was. I wasn't the helpless old lady they could steamroll. No, I was Eleanor Vance, the daughter of a decorated war veteran. A woman who had rebuilt her life once before after losing the love of her life. I had survived much worse. The next morning I knew what I had to do. I called Harrison Sterling. We met at a coffee shop 3 towns over, far from prying eyes. I showed him the recording from the baby monitor, the damning proof of their plot. Harrison listened intently, his face betraying little emotion, but I could see the fury building in his eyes. "This is conspiracy to commit fraud, Eleanor," he said, his voice low and controlled. "Elder abuse. We can destroy them." "I don't just want to sue them, Harrison," I said, staring down into my black coffee. "I want to protect my home. I want the house to remain in the family. Forever." Harrison nodded. "Understood. We'll make sure that nothing they do will touch this place. We'll make sure that when this is over, they won't have a penny to their name." And so we began. I played my part perfectly. I started acting confused. I asked Lucas the same question 3 times in a row, just as though I were losing my mind. I pretended to misplace my glasses, my keys. I saw the way their eyes gleamed with triumph as they exchanged glances, thinking they were winning. They thought they were breaking me down. They thought I was crumbling, becoming the perfect target for their plan. But the trap had already been set. And I was ready. On Thursday evening I dropped the bait. "Lucas, Jessica," I said at dinner, my hand trembling slightly as I held my fork, making sure to appear frail and unsure. "I've been thinking this house. It's too much for me. I feel confused lately. Maybe you're right. Maybe I should move to a facility. Somewhere where I can be looked after." Jessica's eyes widened in shock. "Oh, Eleanor, do you really think so?" Her voice was full of false sweetness. "It might be for the best." She set down her wine glass, her hands trembling with anticipation, and Lucas too looked eager. his face slightly flushed with excitement. "We just want you safe," he said, his voice dripping with false concern. I continued, making sure they were both hanging on every word. "Yes, I think it might be the right time. But there's something I need to take care of first. This house, it's too much for me to maintain. I'd like to sign it over to you so you don't have to worry about inheritance taxes later. Can we do it on Monday? I'll call Mr. Sterling." The room went silent. For a moment, Jessica and Lucas stared at me, unable to hide their shock. And then in an instant, Lucas reached across the table and grabbed my hand, his palm clammy. "Mom," he said, his voice soft but strained. "That is a very brave decision. We'll take care of everything. You won't have to lift a finger. We'll do it Monday." I could feel the weight of his words, but I knew that everything was falling into place. Their confidence, their arrogance. They were already counting the $5 million, imagining the penthouse in Miami, the life they thought they deserved. They were blind to the fact that the game had already changed. And so the weekend passed with them packing boxes, talking about renovations, measuring windows for new drapes. They were intoxicated by their own greed, treating me like a piece of old furniture that was about to be discarded. But I wasn't a fool. I wasn't helpless. And I had one more card to play. Sunday night, while they slept, dreaming of their new life, the locksmith arrived. I had already sent the children to a sleepover at their cousin's house earlier that day to spare them the trauma of what was about to happen. I didn't want them to see their parents destroyed, even if they deserved it. The locksmith worked quickly, silently, changing every lock in the house. The back door, the side door, the garage door, and the heavy front door. I had him disable the keypad code. At 3 a.m. the job was done. I sat in the kitchen, waiting, my heart racing in anticipation. I knew the moment they left for their early morning spin class, I would make my move. And sure enough, at 5 a.m. they left the house. They were so sure of themselves, so confident, they didn't even bother to check if I was awake. They didn't think I could possibly be a threat. As soon as their car pulled out of the driveway, I bolted the door. And that brings us back to the present. The sledgehammer lying on the porch. The silence, broken only by the soft chirping of crickets. Harrison stepped forward, picking up the sledgehammer with a disdainful grimace. He leaned it against the wall and looked at Lucas and Jessica, standing on the porch like children caught in a lie. "Good morning, Lucas," he said, his voice sharp, unyielding. "Jessica, I suggest you lower your voices. The neighbors are already watching." Lucas found his voice first, his words strangled, almost pathetic. "What is going on? Why are the locks changed?" Harrison smiled thinly. "Ah yes, the locks. I have the papers right here," he said, pulling out a thick sheaf of documents from his leather briefcase. "But these aren't transfer deeds, Lucas. This is a copy of the irrevocable trust that Eleanor established 3 days ago." Jessica's face went pale. "Trust?" she screeched. "What trust?" "The Eleanor Vance Heritage Trust," Harrison explained calmly. "As of last Thursday, this property no longer belongs to Mrs. Vance personally. It belongs to the trust. Mrs. Vance retains a life estate, meaning she has the exclusive right to live here until her passing. Upon her death, the property passes directly to her grandchildren, Leo and Mia." Lucas looked like he'd been punched in the gut. "But the $5 million. There is no $5 million for you, son," I said, stepping forward, my voice steady, unwavering. "There is no penthouse in Miami. There is no nursing home for me." And then, just to add salt to the wound, I looked at Jessica and said, "We also have the matter of the $150,000 obtained under false pretenses. Wire fraud is a serious federal offense, Jessica. Faking a terminal illness to fund cosmetic surgery? The district attorney would have a field day with that." Jessica's face drained of color. Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. "And you, Lucas," I continued, my eyes locking with his. I could see the shame wrestling with the anger in his eyes. "I heard you. I heard you on the baby monitor. I heard you say I had lived long enough. I heard you call me a waste of space." He flinched. "Mom, I didn't mean it. I was just blowing off steam. Don't lie to me anymore," I shouted, the first time I had raised my voice in months. "Do not lie to me anymore. A son who loves his mother does not plan to lock her away in a state facility. A son who respects his father does not throw away his life's work to paint the walls gray. I took a deep breath, calming myself. You have 1 hour. The police are already on standby down the street. 1 hour to pack your personal things. And then you're gone. The furniture you bought with my money stays. The electronics stay. You leave with what you came with. Where do we go? Lucas asked, his voice trembling. I don't know, I said, my voice calm. You're young. You're healthy. You figure it out. Just like you told me to figure out my confusion. And so they did. Exactly 58 minutes later, I watched from the window as they loaded their suitcases into their leased SUV. Jessica was screaming into her phone, presumably at her parents. Lucas, defeated, looked back at the house once before he slumped his shoulders and climbed into the car. When the car disappeared around the bend, the silence returned. But it wasn't the empty, aching silence I had known before. No, this silence was clean. It was peaceful. Later that afternoon, I went to the storage unit downtown, where Harrison had forced Lucas to give up the location. There I found Arthur's paintings, his books. I brought them home. I spent the next week repainting the hallway. I chose a warm, vibrant peach color, the color of the sunrise. I brought my velvet chair back from the garage, cleaned it, positioned it by the window, and sat down with a cup of tea. For the first time in months, I felt like I had control over my own life again. The road to healing wasn't a straight line. There were nights I cried for my son. There were days I worried about my grandchildren. But I made sure Leo and Mia knew they were always welcome, without their parents. They came. On weekends, they'd ride their bikes over to escape the chaos of their parents' crumbling marriage. We baked cookies, I told them stories about their grandfather, and I taught them the value of history, of integrity. 3 months later, I received a letter from Lucas. No apology, just a request for a loan. I tore it up and put it in the compost bin. It would serve better as fertilizer for my roses than it ever would as a sentiment of family. I had learned something profound during that time in my empty house. Dignity isn't something you're given, something you forge. Setting boundaries is the highest form of self-respect. And while a mother's love is endless, her tolerance for abuse should not be. I am Eleanor Vance. I am 72 years old. I live alone in a house that is too big for me, filled with memories of a love that was real and true. And every morning when I unlock my front door to let the Savannah sun stream in, I smile. Because I know the only people who will walk through that door now are the ones who respect the woman standing inside it. And that, my friends, is worth more than $5 million. That is everything. How will Eleanor continue to reclaim her life? The next chapter of her journey awaits. Stay tuned for the final chapter of her powerful transformation. The silence in the house, now more settled than it had ever been, felt like a balm to my wounded soul. With each passing day, the weight of betrayal, the sting of loss, slowly began to lift. But healing wasn't instantaneous. It was a process, one I had to walk alone at my own pace and in my own way. In the mornings when the Savannah sun filtered through the heavy curtains, I could hear the birds singing from the oak trees outside. The house, once a prison of empty rooms and regret, had begun to feel like home again. My home. I spent my days reclaiming what was rightfully mine. The space, my independence, my memories. The grand hallway, once stripped of everything that mattered, now gleamed with a fresh coat of paint in that warm peach color. The color of a new beginning. The velvet chair, a reminder of better days, sat proudly by the window. Every time I sank into it, the weight of the past seemed a little lighter. But as I basked in this newfound peace, the truth was still there, lingering in the corners of my mind. My family had betrayed me. They had tried to break me and almost succeeded. But I had fought back. I had stood my ground. And in doing so, I had reminded myself of something I had forgotten. My worth. I didn't expect Lucas or Jessica to come knocking at my door asking for forgiveness. I knew that the path they had chosen was one of pride and greed, and there would be no turning back for them. But in some small, quiet part of me, I still wondered, did they feel any remorse? Did they regret the things they had done? Then one day the phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in my gut told me it was them. With a sigh, I picked up the receiver. Eleanor. The voice was shaky, filled with uncertainty. It was Lucas. My heart tightened, but I forced myself to stay calm. I had learned the hard way not to let emotions cloud my judgment. Mom, he continued, his voice small. I know you probably don't want to hear from me, but I need to say something. I waited, my fingers gripping the phone tightly as I fought the urge to hang up. I'm sorry, he said, and I could hear the weight of the words in his voice, something I hadn't expected. I didn't know how far it had gone. I didn't realize what we were doing, what it was doing to you. I never should have let Jessica push me to do those things. I was just desperate. I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted you to know that I'm sorry. His words hung in the air, heavy with remorse, but also with an underlying sadness that I couldn't quite place. I felt a lump rise in my throat. I had spent months wondering if he would ever come to this realization, and now that it was here, it was hard to reconcile with the boy I had raised, the young man I had loved so deeply. I know, I said softly, my voice steady though inside I was breaking. But it's too late, Lucas. You can't undo what's been done. You can't take back the hurt. He was silent for a moment, and I could hear the faint sound of him sniffing, trying to control his emotions. I know, he whispered, defeated. I understand. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. The line went quiet, and for a long moment I wasn't sure what to say. I had wanted this. I had longed for an apology, for some acknowledgement of the pain they had caused. But hearing it now, I couldn't help but feel empty, as though it was too little too late. I hope you find peace, Lucas, I said, my voice soft but firm. But I have to move on. I can't keep looking back. With that, I hung up the phone. I sat there for a while, the weight of the conversation pressing on my chest. I had waited for this moment for so long, but now that it was here, I couldn't help but feel that it didn't change anything. The damage had been done, and while I could forgive him, I could never forget. But forgiveness wasn't for them. It was for me. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Life slowly returned to a sense of normalcy, though a new normal. There were moments of quiet joy, Leo and Mia coming over to bake cookies, to listen to stories about their grandfather. I took them to the park, let them ride their bikes, and tried to fill their lives with the love I had once thought I'd lost. But there was still an emptiness that lingered in the corners of my heart. The absence of Arthur, the absence of trust in my own blood. It was a hole that couldn't be filled with anything else. Then one day, as I sat in my velvet chair by the window, sipping tea and watching the world pass by, I saw something that made my heart skip a beat. Leo and Mia were riding their bikes down the long driveway, their laughter ringing through the air like music. They were happy, genuinely happy, and in that moment I realized that I had made the right choice. I had fought for them. I had fought for my legacy. And as I watched them ride off into the distance, I knew that I would do whatever it took to protect them from the same darkness that had nearly consumed me. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to fight for your peace, even when it meant standing up to the people you loved most? If you've dealt with betrayal or found the strength to reclaim your life, share your story below. You're not alone. And if you want more stories about resilience, about reclaiming your power, don't forget to subscribe. I spent the rest of that afternoon walking through the rooms of the house, my fingers brushing against the old furniture, the familiar walls. I stopped in front of the grand mirror in the entryway, the one Arthur had restored with so much care. I looked at my reflection, stronger, older, but standing tall. I had faced the darkest parts of my soul. I had learned to let go of the things that no longer served me, to forgive, to heal. I had done the impossible. I had saved myself. And in the end, that was all I could ever truly control. I am Eleanor Vance. I am 72 years old, and I know now with absolute certainty that the only person who can define my worth is me. What will Eleanor do next in her journey? Will her family try again to regain her trust? Stay tuned for the final chapter. This story is far from over. The weeks that followed Lucas's call were a quiet kind of peace, one that felt earned and hard-won. I spent my days in ways that filled me with a new sense of purpose. I volunteered at the local shelter, helping where I could, offering companionship to the elderly, sharing stories about the good old days. The days when I believed in the power of family, the days when I thought love was enough to conquer all. I pored over Arthur's journals, rediscovering the life we had built together, the dreams we had shared, and the way he had loved me with such unwavering devotion. It was painful, yes, but it was also beautiful. A reminder that not all love was tainted by betrayal, that the kind of love I had once known still existed in the memories we had made. But even in the quiet of my days, the shadows of my family's betrayal lingered, just beyond the edges of my peace. I couldn't completely erase the memory of the sledgehammer crashing against the door, or the hollow look in Lucas's eyes when he had stood on that porch, as if he was seeing me for the first time. It was a wound that still needed healing, and I wasn't sure I could do it alone. And then, just when I had begun to think I was healing, the doorbell rang one chilly afternoon in February. It was a sound I hadn't expected. I had become used to the absence of visitors, the silence of my own space. But there it was again, the doorbell, sharp and insistent. I walked slowly down the hallway, the floor creaking beneath my feet, a feeling of dread growing in my stomach. I had no idea who could be on the other side, but I knew with some odd certainty that it wasn't good. I opened the door, and there stood a man I didn't recognize at first. He was tall, with dark eyes and a solemn expression, wearing a long dark coat that made him seem even more intimidating. In his hand was a briefcase, its contents no doubt important and official. But what caught my eye more than anything was the look in his eyes, something cold, something determined. "Mrs. Vance?" he asked, his voice deep and professional. "Yes," I said, my voice steady though my heart raced. "Who are you?" "My name is Thomas Walker. I'm an attorney. I represent the interests of your son, Lucas Vance." A chill ran down my spine at the mention of his name. My stomach twisted, but I held my ground, not showing any sign of weakness. "What do you want?" I asked, my voice firm. "I'm here on behalf of my client," he said, opening his briefcase slowly. "Lucas has requested that you relinquish your rights to the house and the estate. He believes that the trust you established is invalid, and he intends to challenge it in court. He claims you were coerced into making it, that you were not of sound mind when you did so. He's prepared to take legal action." I stood frozen for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in. Lucas was going to fight me again? After everything that had happened? After the lies, the manipulation, the cruelty he had shown me? "No," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "I will not give up my rights to this house. It's mine and it always has been. And I'll fight for it just like I fought for my own freedom." He didn't seem surprised by my response. In fact, there was something almost pitying in his eyes. He pulled out a stack of papers from the briefcase and handed them to me. "I'm sorry to be the bearer of bad news," he said, "but this matter will go to court. Lucas is determined, and there's a great deal of money at stake." I took the papers, my fingers brushing against the cold surface of the documents. My heart pounded in my chest, but I didn't let him see my fear. I had been through too much already. If Lucas thought he could break me again, he was sorely mistaken. "I'll see you in court," I said, closing the door with a firm click. And just like that, the silence returned. But it was different this time. It wasn't peaceful. It was charged with a new kind of tension. One that only a battle for what's yours can bring. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to fight for what was rightfully yours, even when everything seemed stacked against you? Share your stories below. If you've ever had to stand your ground in the face of betrayal, I want to hear from you. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories of strength, survival, and reclaiming your life. The next few weeks passed in a blur of preparation. I called Harrison Sterling my steadfast ally through it all, and we immediately began working on my defense. The case Lucas was building against me was weak, but he had one thing I couldn't ignore: his persistence. It was the same kind of tenacity that had driven him to strike the door with a sledgehammer, to manipulate and lie, to push me to the edge. And now he was doing it all over again. But I had Harrison, and together we meticulously prepared. We combed through the trust documents, gathering evidence of my mental soundness at the time of the signing. We sought out witnesses who could attest to my clear thinking and the fact that I had been in full control of my faculties when I made the decision to protect my home and my legacy. I won't lie. There were days when the anxiety threatened to swallow me whole. The thought of fighting my own son in court was too much to bear. The weight of the betrayal, of watching the family I had loved so deeply turn on me again, was almost unbearable. But I refused to let him win. I refused to let him tear down what was mine, what Arthur and I had built together. On the day of the trial, I walked into the courthouse with my head held high, my heart steady in my chest. Harrison and I stood together side by side as we faced the courtroom. The legal team representing Lucas was there too, but there was something different this time. Lucas wasn't present. He was too ashamed to show his face. I stood tall, determined, even as the memories of his betrayal threatened to cloud my thoughts. This wasn't about Lucas anymore. This was about me. This was about reclaiming my dignity, my peace, and my home. What will the outcome of the trial be? Will Eleanor stand her ground and keep her home? Or will her son win the battle over the inheritance? Stay tuned to find out how the final chapter of her journey unfolds. The courthouse was cold and sterile, its high ceilings echoing with the sound of my footsteps as I walked into the courtroom. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air, but I refused to let it crush me. This was the moment I had been preparing for. Every long night spent strategizing with Harrison, every hour spent gathering evidence to prove my case. I wasn't just fighting for my house anymore. I was fighting for my dignity, my independence, my right to be treated with respect in my own home. And no one was going to take that from me. I took my seat, my back straight, my hands folded in my lap. I could feel the eyes of the courtroom on me, but I held my ground. This wasn't the same frightened woman who had once opened the door to Lucas with trembling hands. No, today I was Eleanor Vance, a woman who had fought through loss, betrayal, and heartache, and come out the other side stronger than before. The trial began, and I could feel the tension rising with every word spoken. The attorneys from both sides presented their arguments. Lucas's legal team claimed that I wasn't of sound mind when I created the trust, that I had been manipulated, coerced into making decisions I didn't understand. They even tried to paint Harrison as a villain, someone who had preyed on a vulnerable widow to secure my money and property. They called witnesses to testify that I had been struggling mentally, that my memory had been slipping. But I didn't flinch. I knew what they were doing, and I wouldn't allow them to tear down everything I had worked for, everything I had fought for. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up, taking a deep breath before walking to the witness stand. Harrison's reassuring gaze followed me, and I felt a sense of calm wash over me. I wasn't alone in this fight. Mrs. Vance, the opposing attorney began, trying to sound neutral, but I could hear the condescension in his voice. You're claiming that you made this decision independently with a clear mind? I am, I replied, my voice steady. I knew exactly what I was doing when I created the trust. And I knew exactly who I was protecting when I did it. The courtroom fell silent. I could feel their eyes on me waiting for me to crack. But I wasn't afraid. I was married to Arthur Vance for over 40 years. I continued, my voice firm and unwavering. We built this home together. We raised a family here. And when I lost him, I lost the person who kept me grounded, the person who kept me strong. But that didn't mean I lost myself. I didn't forget who I was, or what I was capable of. I paused, my eyes scanning the room, landing on Lucas's empty seat. My son Lucas came to me in a time of crisis, and I opened my doors to him. I welcomed him, Jessica, and my grandchildren into my home with open arms. I believed in family. I believed in the power of love and support. But what I didn't know was that my son was more interested in what he could take from me than what he could give. He thought I was weak. He thought I could be manipulated. I felt the familiar sting of betrayal deep in my chest, but I didn't allow it to show. But I wasn't weak. I made a choice. I made that choice because I needed to protect my future, my legacy, and the only home my grandchildren will ever know. And I did it with a clear mind. I turned to face Harrison, who nodded at me with a quiet smile of approval. I knew I had said everything I needed to say, and now it was in the hands of the court. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to stand up and fight for your right to be heard? Have you ever been pushed to a breaking point only to rise up stronger than before? Share your story. We all have moments when we need to reclaim our dignity. And if you believe in the power of resilience, subscribe for more stories of strength and survival. The trial went on for hours, each side presenting their evidence, but in my heart, I knew the truth. My truth. When the time came for closing arguments, I listened as Lucas's attorney tried one last desperate move, painting me as an elderly woman who had been taken advantage of by a smooth-talking lawyer. They tried to discredit me, tried to make me appear as though I were losing my grip on reality. But I held firm. I wasn't the fool they thought I was. I had seen through their manipulation from the start, and I had built a foundation strong enough to withstand their lies. Finally, the judge called for a recess, and we waited for his decision. It felt like an eternity as I sat there, my hands trembling ever so slightly, my thoughts racing. I had never wanted this, never wanted to turn my own son into an enemy, but he had left me no choice. I thought about the years I had spent raising him, the late nights comforting him, the sacrifices I had made to ensure he had everything he needed. I thought about the hope I had carried that one day, in his own time, he would understand the depth of love I had for him. But now it was clear. The road to healing wouldn't be easy. It might never be. But I was ready to take the first step. Because I had already fought for what was mine, and no one could take it from me now. The decision was looming. What will the judge decide? Will Eleanor's fight for her home be victorious? Or will Lucas's persistence tear everything apart? The final moment of truth is coming. Stay tuned for the conclusion of Eleanor's fight. Finally, the judge returned to the courtroom, and the tension was almost unbearable. He sat down, cleared his throat, and looked around at everyone in the room. After careful consideration of the evidence presented, he began, his voice stern and unwavering. It is clear that Mrs. Vance made this decision with full mental capacity and in accordance with her wishes. The trust is valid. A wave of relief washed over me. I felt it in the pit of my stomach, a sense of peace I hadn't felt in months. But the judge wasn't finished. However, he continued, the matter of the $150,000 and the fraudulent claim of illness must be addressed. The court finds that Lucas Vance and his wife, Jessica, acted in bad faith, and this will be taken into account in further proceedings. My heart skipped a beat. I wasn't sure whether to feel relief or anger, but it didn't matter. Justice was being served. I turned to Harrison, who gave me a small, approving smile. It wasn't over, not yet. But I had won. I had won. The battle is over, but the fight for Eleanor's peace isn't finished. What happens next in her journey? Stay tuned for the final chapter as she rebuilds her life and her legacy. The decision came down in my favor. The trust was valid, my mental capacity intact, my autonomy defended. But the fight wasn't truly over. It never really is it? The courtroom was filled with a quiet hum of murmurs as the judge spoke the final words. But I barely heard them. I couldn't. My mind was spinning. Relief and anger coiled together in my chest, the emotions tangled like vines. The air felt lighter but at the same time heavier, full of finality. As the crowd began to disperse, I sat there for a long moment taking it all in. I had done it. I had stood my ground. I had kept my home, my legacy, my dignity. But there was still one piece of the puzzle left to fall into place. Lucas and Jessica. They hadn't been present for the decision. They hadn't been there to hear the judge's words, to witness their world shattering before them. I couldn't decide whether it was a relief or a disappointment. I had hoped even now that Lucas might show up. If not to fight, then to understand, to see how far his actions had brought us. But he didn't. I was left with a gnawing emptiness, a hollow feeling that refused to fade. This wasn't the way it was supposed to be. Family wasn't supposed to feel like a battlefield. But here we were. The next few days felt like a blur. There were calls from reporters, questions from well-meaning neighbors, and visits from old friends. Everyone wanted to know what happened in court, how I had managed to keep the house, how I had survived the storm. And I answered them all with a smile, though inside my heart still ached. I spent hours with Harrison, going over the details of the case, discussing next steps. There would be further legal action, yes. But for now, the immediate danger had passed. The house was mine. The trust was intact. Yet, the emotional toll it had taken on me, on my sense of self, on the trust one had placed in my own flesh and blood, was something I wasn't sure how to repair. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to fight for something that should have been given to you from the start? How did you deal with the aftermath? Share your story with me below, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories about resilience, redemption, and reclaiming your life. One evening, as I sat alone in the living room, surrounded by the familiar warmth of the house, a familiar knock sounded at the door. It wasn't the pounding of a sledgehammer this time, but the hesitant tap of knuckles against wood. My heart skipped a beat. I already knew who it was before I even looked through the peephole. I opened the door slowly, my hands trembling just a little. Standing there, looking smaller than I remembered, was Lucas. His face was drawn, his eyes tired. He was wearing the same coat he'd had on when he came to see me the first time, before everything had gone wrong. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. He looked like he had aged years in the past few months. His shoulders slumped as if the weight of the world had finally caught up with him. "Mom," he said. His voice cracked, quieter than I had ever heard it. "Can we talk?" I stood there, my heart pounding in my chest. I wasn't sure what to expect, but I knew that the confrontation I had been dreading for months was finally here. This was the moment. I nodded, stepping aside to let him in. We sat down in the living room, the same space where just a few weeks ago, I had stood firm against his betrayal. The silence between us was thick, heavy with unspoken words. I don't know where to start," he said, running a hand through his hair, looking lost. "I don't know how to make it right." I didn't speak at first. I just watched him, the boy I had loved so fiercely, now a man broken by his own choices. His words were stilted, unsure. "I didn't realize what I was doing, Mom," he continued. "I didn't see how far I'd gone. I don't know why I listened to Jessica. I just wanted things to be different, and I thought I could fix it all by getting this house, by having it all. But I was wrong. I was so wrong." His eyes met mine, full of regret and shame. For a moment I saw the Lucas I had raised, the one who had once trusted me, the one who had turned to me for comfort when life was too hard. That Lucas was still there, buried under the weight of his own mistakes. "Mom, I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice breaking. "I don't even deserve it. But I need you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." I took a deep breath, the words coming slowly but surely. "Lucas," I began, my voice steady, "forgiveness doesn't come easily. I spent months wondering why you would betray me, why you would try to take what's mine. And I can't pretend that it didn't hurt, because it did. It hurt more than you'll ever know." He nodded, his eyes filled with sorrow. "I know," he whispered. "I'm sorry, Mom." I sat there for a long moment, the weight of everything finally starting to settle. "Lucas," I said softly, "I've forgiven you. But forgiveness doesn't erase what's been done. You have to live with the consequences of your choices just like I had to. And I have to rebuild my trust in you. That's not something I can do overnight." He nodded again, tears welling in his eyes. "I understand," he said, his voice thick. "I'm not asking for anything. I just wanted to come here to tell you that I messed up. I wanted to say that I'm sorry, and that I'm going to make things right, no matter how long it takes." The words hung in the air between us, heavy and pregnant with the promise of change. I couldn't know for sure if he would ever truly change, if this would be the beginning of a new chapter in our relationship, but I had to let him try. For the sake of my peace, for the sake of my own healing, I had to let go of the anger that had held me prisoner for so long. "I'll give you the chance," I said, my voice calm but resolute. "But only if you prove to me that you're serious. No more lies. No more manipulation." He looked at me with determination in his eyes, his voice soft but sincere. "I will. I swear I will. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to decide whether to give someone a second chance? What made you choose forgiveness, or did you walk away instead? Let me know your story, and don't forget to subscribe for more inspiring journeys of redemption and strength." Over the next few weeks, things began to shift slowly but surely. Lucas came by more often, this time without an agenda, just to talk, to be present. He worked hard to repair the relationship, though I knew the scars of betrayal would never fully disappear. But we were moving forward, one cautious step at a time. I knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Trust is fragile, and it takes time to rebuild what's been broken. But I had learned something important in these past few months. Healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens through understanding, through vulnerability, through the willingness to face the truth. As for me, I was stronger than I had ever been. I had faced my fears, fought for my peace, and reclaimed my life. And in the process, I had come to understand that the only true victory is the one you find within yourself. I am Eleanor Vance. I am 72 years old. And no matter what comes next, I know that I can handle it. Because I am the one who decides my fate. And that, my friends, is everything. Eleanor's journey is far from over. How will she continue to rebuild her life? Stay tuned for the next chapter in her story. The months that followed Lucas's apology were filled with quiet, steady progress. Trust, though fragile, began to take root again, slowly but surely. I didn't expect everything to be fixed overnight. Forgiveness is never a quick fix, especially when betrayal runs so deep. But little by little, I started to see the man Lucas could be, not the one who had once wielded a sledgehammer against my door, but the son I had raised, the son who had learned from his mistakes, who wanted to make amends. I watched him with cautious eyes, paying attention to his actions, not just his words. I noticed how he stayed longer in the house, not to take but to give, offering to help with repairs, spending time with the children, his own way of showing that he was trying to make things right. The house, once a battlefield, was now becoming a place of rebuilding. Not just the physical walls, but the emotional ones that had been torn down. One afternoon, as I was sitting in the kitchen sipping my tea, Lucas walked in with a hesitant smile. He had a stack of papers in his hands, and I raised an eyebrow as he set them down in front of me. "What's this?" I asked, though I already had a feeling I knew. "It's a start," he said, his voice steady but nervous. "I've been working with Harrison to make sure this place stays in the family. I wanted to make it official." I looked down at the papers. The words irrevocable trust jumped out at me. But this wasn't just any trust, it was a new one. One that ensured that no matter what happened, my grandchildren Leo and Mia would inherit this home when I was gone. A new clause was added. It was to remain in the family. No one could sell it. No one could take it away from the people who had grown up with its walls, with its history. I stared at the papers, a mixture of emotions swirling inside me. This was Lucas's way of making amends, of proving that he understood. He was giving me something more than just apologies. He was securing the future, ensuring that what I had fought so hard for would remain intact for the next generation. "I thought it was time to make sure they couldn't touch it again," he said softly. "You were right, Mom. This is a legacy, and it's one that I don't want to destroy. Not again." A lump formed in my throat. I had spent so many sleepless nights worrying about the future of this house, about the idea that it could slip through my fingers, that my children's greed might cost my grandchildren their history. Now Lucas was giving it back to them, to Leo and Mia, and he was giving it back to me. "I didn't know how to fix it," he continued, sitting down beside me. "But I know now. I have to make it right. For you. For them." I nodded slowly, feeling the weight of the moment settle between us. He had come so far. There was still work to be done, and there would be days when it would feel impossible, but for the first time I could see a future where we were all healing. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever seen someone make an effort to truly change? Was it enough to rebuild trust, or did it take more time? If you've experienced forgiveness and rebuilding in your own life, I'd love to hear your story. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about redemption and strength. A few weeks later, I stood at the front door, looking out over the oak-lined driveway. The sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting the house in a soft golden glow. Leo and Mia were outside, riding their bikes in the yard, their laughter ringing through the evening air. For the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I felt at peace. The storm had passed. The house that had once been a battleground now felt like a sanctuary again. Not because it was without scars, but because it had survived. We had all survived. I had learned that healing is not a destination but a journey. It's a journey full of missteps, of pain, of moments when you want to give up, but also moments when you surprise yourself with the strength you didn't know you had. And it's about knowing that no matter what, you are worthy of a life filled with respect, with love, and with peace. Lucas stood beside me watching the kids ride by. "They're good kids," he said, his voice filled with a quiet pride. "I don't want them to see what I did. I don't want them to think this is how things should be." "They won't," I said, my voice soft. "They'll see you trying to make things right. And that's all anyone can do." For a long moment we just stood there in silence, watching the world outside, the soft chirping of the crickets filling the air. I didn't need to say more. The understanding was there between us. Later that evening, as I sat in the kitchen preparing dinner, I felt a presence behind me. I turned around to find Lucas standing there, holding something small and square in his hand. "I found something," he said, a hint of nervousness in his voice. I raised an eyebrow. He handed me the object, a photo frame. I blinked in surprise when I saw the picture inside. It was a photo of Arthur and me, taken on our wedding day. We were standing outside under the oak tree in the yard, both of us grinning like we had the whole world at our feet. "I found this in the attic," Lucas said quietly. "I thought you might want it." I stared at the picture for a long time, my heart swelling with emotion. "Thank you," I said softly, my voice thick with gratitude. He nodded and left me alone with my memories. Lucas and I had come a long way, but there were still hurdles ahead. Will we continue to rebuild the fractured pieces of our family? Or will old wounds resurface? Stay tuned for the next chapter of Eleanor's journey, where the past and present collide, and where true healing might just be within reach. The days turned into weeks and the weeks into months, and while the shadows of the past never fully disappeared, the light that filled the house began to feel real. Leo and Mia continued to visit often, their laughter a constant reminder that, despite the pain we had endured, life still moved forward. And in that forward motion there was hope. I continued to tend to the garden Arthur had loved, to sit on the porch and watch the sun set, and to listen to the stories of the past, keeping them alive for my grandchildren. Lucas, too, continued to prove himself, not just through words but through actions. He spent more time with Mia and Leo, taking them fishing, teaching them the things that mattered. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. It was enough to heal the cracks that had once threatened to break us. And so, as the years passed, the house remained a sanctuary, one that held memories of pain, but also of growth, of redemption, of love that refused to die, even when it had been tested. I am Eleanor Vance. I am 74 years old, and I have learned that even in the darkest moments, there is always light, as long as you are willing to find it. Eleanor's story continues, and the next chapter will reveal what the future holds. How will this family continue to evolve? Stay tuned for the next step in their journey. It's strange the way life moves in waves. You can stand there at the shore watching the tides come and go, thinking you finally found a sense of balance. Then a wave crashes in unexpectedly, leaving you breathless, unprepared. But it's not the crashing waves that matter. It's how you recover, how you rise, how you learn to swim through the currents. That's how I felt one morning when the phone rang. It was the kind of call you never expect to get, especially when you think things are starting to settle. "Mom!" Lucas's voice came through the receiver, his tone strained. "I need to talk to you. It's urgent." I sat up straight, my heart suddenly pounding. "What's wrong?" "It's Jessica," he said. There was a long pause. "She's gone." Gone. I felt like the world had tilted on its axis, leaving me struggling to keep my balance. "Jessica? Gone. Gone where?" I asked, my voice shaking with disbelief. "Where did she go?" She passed away," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Heart attack. It was sudden. I don't know what to do, Mom." The world around me seemed to stop. A part of me, the part that had been fighting so hard for my family, felt numb. Jessica had been many things, manipulative, deceitful, but I never imagined she would be taken so suddenly. My mind raced with questions, but none of them felt important anymore. She was gone, and whether I liked it or not, that left Lucas with a hole in his life, and I could feel it deep in my chest. I didn't know what to say. I didn't know how to process the news myself, let alone try to comfort Lucas, who had to navigate the sudden loss of his wife, and the complicated feelings tied to their tumultuous relationship. "I'll come to you," I said, surprising myself with the calmness of my own voice. "I'll be there." Tell me in the comments. Have you ever faced unexpected loss, even from someone who caused you pain? How did you cope with the emotions that followed? Share your story with me. We all need strength during those times. Don't forget to subscribe for more stories about resilience, healing, and family. It took me a few hours to gather myself before I drove to Lucas's house. As I got closer, I could feel the weight of the situation pressing down on me. It wasn't the same kind of weight I had felt before. The heavy burden of betrayal, the weight of manipulation. This was different. This was grief. And though I may have been angry at Jessica for what she had done, I couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness for Lucas. No matter what had happened between them, he had lost his partner, his confidant. When I arrived, I found him sitting on the front steps, looking utterly defeated. His face was pale, his eyes bloodshot, The house felt too quiet, the absence of Jessica somehow more noticeable than her presence had ever been. I sat down beside him, not saying anything at first. Sometimes there are no words. "I don't know what to feel, Mom," he whispered, his voice barely audible. "I've hated her for what she did, and I've been angry with her for so long, but now I'm just lost. I don't know who I am without her." I didn't answer right away. I just placed my hand on his, offering the only comfort I could. "It's okay to be confused," I said softly. "It's okay to feel all of it. Grief isn't something you can control. You don't have to make sense of it right away. Just let yourself feel." He nodded slowly, tears welling up in his eyes. I could see it, his pain, his guilt, his sadness. I had raised him to be strong, to fight for what mattered, but sometimes strength looks different. Sometimes strength is in the tears, in the vulnerability, in the acceptance of what you can't change. "I don't know how to move on from this," he said, his voice breaking. "How do I forgive myself for the things I said, the things I did? How do I keep going?" I looked at him, my son, the one who had hurt me, the one I had fought so hard to protect. And in that moment I saw him for what he was. A man who had been through more than most could handle. A man who had been lost but was trying to find his way again. "Lucas," I said, my voice steady, "forgiving yourself is never easy, but it's the only way to heal. You can't change what happened, but you can change how you move forward. You can start fresh. That's what matters." He looked at me, his face filled with uncertainty. But there was something there, something that told me he was starting to believe in the possibility of redemption, of moving on. "I'll try, Mom," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "I'll try." Can forgiveness truly heal the wounds of the past? Can we ever truly move on from the people who've hurt us? Or is it a journey that never ends? Stay tuned for the next chapter, where we see whether Lucas can truly find peace within himself, and if Eleanor's ability to forgive will lead her to the closure she deserves. In the weeks that followed, Lucas and I spent more time together. We talked about the past, about our mistakes, about what it meant to move forward. He started attending therapy, something he had resisted for so long. It wasn't easy. There were days when the weight of it all felt unbearable. Days when we both struggled to find our footing again. But we were trying. That was enough. And then one day Lucas called me. There was something different in his voice. Something lighter, something I hadn't heard in a long time. "I think I'm ready to let go of the past," he said. "I'm ready to stop carrying it around like a weight. I can't change what happened with Jessica. I can't change the things I've done. But I can change who I am now." I smiled softly, feeling the relief wash over me. This was the moment I had been waiting for. The moment when he finally understood that the past does not define us. It's the way we choose to live that matters. "That's all I've ever wanted for you, Lucas," I said. "For you to find peace with yourself. To live without regret." Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to let go of the past in order to move forward? How did you find peace with yourself? Share your thoughts below. Remember to subscribe for more stories of growth, healing, and the power of letting go. As I sit here now reflecting on everything that has happened, I realize how far we've all come. The house, once filled with anger and betrayal, is now a home again. Lucas has started a new chapter in his life, one where he understands the weight of his choices and the importance of redemption. And me? I've learned that forgiveness is not about excusing the past. It's about freeing yourself from its grip. It's about choosing to live with grace, even when the world hasn't been kind. I am Eleanor Vance. I am 74 years old. And I've learned that the greatest act of strength is not holding on to the past, but letting go. What lies ahead for Eleanor and Lucas? Will their relationship continue to heal, or will new challenges arise? Stay tuned for the next chapter of their journey. The days grew longer as summer approached, and the house, once cloaked in the heavy tension of betrayal, began to breathe again. There was an ease to the mornings now, quiet but peaceful. I found myself waking up before the sun, the soft light filtering through the curtains, casting a warm glow over everything. It wasn't perfection, not by a long shot. Life was never perfect, especially not after all that we had been through. But there was a calm I hadn't felt in years, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I could breathe without that constant gnawing anxiety in my chest. Lucas and I were talking more than ever. Not just about the past or the mistakes we had made, but about the future, about what we wanted, what we needed to do to keep moving forward. I could see the change in him. The guilt was still there, buried deep in the folds of his heart, but it didn't consume him anymore. He had started to find peace with his choices, just as I had begun to find peace with mine. One morning he came over for breakfast, looking brighter than I had seen him in years. His hair was a little longer, his eyes clearer, and there was a quiet confidence in his step that hadn't been there before. He sat down across from me at the kitchen table, and I could tell something was on his mind. "Mom," he started, pushing the coffee cup aside. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said, about starting fresh." He paused, then continued, his voice softer, almost vulnerable. "I think I'm ready to move on, to let go of everything from the past." I could see the sincerity in his eyes, the weight of those words settling on him, and for a moment I wasn't sure how to respond. I'd heard him say similar things before, but this time there was something different about it. Something real. "I think it's time to make a change, Mom," he said, a tentative smile forming on his lips. "I've been thinking about moving. Not far, but I need to find my own space. I need to figure out who I am, outside of everything that's happened." I felt a mixture of emotions, pride, sadness, even a little fear. He was my son, and the idea of him leaving the house, leaving me, was bittersweet. But I understood. This wasn't about running away. It was about moving forward. It was a step I had hoped he would take. "I think that's a good idea, Lucas," I said softly, my voice steady despite the ache in my chest. "You've been through a lot, and you've worked hard to rebuild. You deserve a fresh start. And I'll be here, no matter what." He nodded, his eyes glistening with something I couldn't quite place. Gratitude? Relief? Maybe both. "Thanks, Mom," he said quietly. "I don't think I could have gotten this far without you. You've always been there, even when I didn't deserve it." I reached across the table and placed my hand on his. "You're my son. That's all that matters. Tell me in the comments. Have you ever had to let go of something or someone in order to grow? What steps did you take to move forward? Let me know how you found peace in your own journey. And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories of healing, hope, and new beginnings. That afternoon, Lucas came back to the house with a box. Nothing fancy, just a simple cardboard box filled with a few things that had once belonged to Jessica. A necklace she had left behind, a few photographs, a jacket he hadn't worn in years. It felt like the last step in releasing the past, a symbolic gesture of letting go. "I can't keep holding on to these," he said quietly, holding the box in his hands like it was fragile, as if the memories inside might crumble if he wasn't careful. "I need to clear out what's left. I think I'm ready to start fresh." I nodded, my heart aching for him but also filled with pride. This was growth. This was what healing looked like. I had seen the man he could become, and I knew he was getting closer to realizing that potential. We spent the next hour going through the house, sorting through boxes, clearing out the clutter. There was something cathartic about it, something that helped release all the remnants of the past, not just the physical ones, but the emotional baggage we had both carried for so long. As the evening drew near, we sat on the porch watching the sun set over the trees. The house felt lighter somehow, and so did we. The weight of the past had loosened, if only just a little. But it was enough. "I'm proud of you, Lucas," I said quietly, my eyes on the horizon. "You've come a long way." "I couldn't have done it without you, Mom," he replied, his voice steady, filled with a kind of certainty I hadn't heard from him in years. "You've always believed in me, even when I didn't believe in myself." There was a long silence between us, but it wasn't awkward. It was comfortable, like we both knew that this moment, this quiet peace, was something we had both earned. "I love you, Mom," Lucas said, his voice filled with emotion. "I love you too, Lucas," I said, my voice thick with the words I had said so many times before, but now they felt more real than they ever had. The journey of healing is never linear, and there are still bumps in the road ahead for both Lucas and me. But we've learned that love is more than just words. It's actions, it's forgiveness, it's growth. What will the next chapter hold for us? Stay tuned to see how our story unfolds. The days passed, and with each one, I could feel the house becoming more and more of a sanctuary. Not just for me, but for my family. Lucas had found a small apartment nearby, a fresh start in a space of his own. And though he would never be far, it was a reminder that both of us had moved on, that we had let go of the past, and were walking into the future with open hearts. As for me, I knew that the journey wasn't over. Life would always bring its challenges, but I was ready for whatever came next. I had learned to trust in myself again, to forgive, to love unconditionally, and most importantly, to live for the present. Because at the end of the day, it's not the past that defines you. It's the choices you make now. I am Eleanor Vance. I am 74 years old, and I have learned that while the road to healing is long, it's worth every step. What's next for Eleanor and Lucas? Will they continue to rebuild their relationship and their lives? Stay tuned to see how this story of growth and redemption continues. The air around the house had changed. The sun seemed to shine a little brighter, the breeze a little softer. It was as if the house itself had breathed a collective sigh of relief. What had once been a place of turmoil, of pain, was now a home once more. Not just because the walls stood firm or the furniture was arranged just right, but because the people who walked through it had healed slowly, painfully but surely. Lucas had settled into his new apartment. It wasn't grand, but it was his. I saw the changes in him, not just in his actions, but in the quiet confidence that had begun to fill his eyes. He was on his own journey now, one that was still unfolding, but I could see the promise of who he could be. As for me, I found myself standing in the kitchen one evening, stirring a pot of soup as the smell of rosemary and garlic filled the room. It was a quiet night, the kind of night I had once feared, the kind of night that would stretch out into loneliness. But not anymore. The house wasn't empty. The memories didn't feel heavy anymore. They were just part of me, part of the story I had lived. And it was a beautiful one. I sat down at the kitchen table, the warm light of the lamps casting shadows across the room. My hands, the same hands that had once trembled, were steady now. And my heart? It was full, not of the bitterness of the past, but of something new, something lighter. I picked up a letter that had arrived earlier that day. It was from Leo and Mia, my grandchildren. They had written to tell me about their summer plans, how they were looking forward to visiting me, to spending time at the house. There was a drawing from Mia. A picture of the oak tree in the yard with their bike tires spinning in the grass, the house standing tall in the background. I smiled to myself. The legacy I had fought for, the home that had seen so many battles, would continue to be a place of love, of laughter, of stories passed down through the generations. As I looked out the window, the sun setting in the distance, I realized that peace wasn't about erasing the past. It was about learning from it. It was about living with it, finding strength in it, and then letting it go when the time was right. It was about finding beauty in the present, no matter what had come before. I had learned that forgiveness is not a gift you give others, but a gift you give yourself. It frees you from the past, allowing you to step into the future with your head held high. I am Eleanor Vance. I am 74 years old, and the life I've lived, the one filled with loss, love, mistakes, and healing, has made me who I am today. A woman who knows her worth, who knows what it means to forgive, and who knows that while the past will always be a part of me, it will not define me. And so, as I sit here in the quiet of my home, I realize that the real victory isn't in what I've held on to. It's in what I've let go. Thank you for following Eleanor's journey. A story of growth, forgiveness, and reclaiming the life we deserve. What will the next chapter of your story be? Keep moving forward.